Hey guys, I'm coming to you from a very rainy afternoon here in the deep south. But what I'm talking about today is these plants, which are Okinawan sweet potatoes. And I'm also going to be talking about the normal variety of American sweet potatoes. But this was started just a couple of months ago from one single potato, and it's just taken over the entire bed. I cut it into smaller pieces, put it in the ground directly, and it's just turned into a entire bed of sweet potatoes. I'm hoping to harvest this before our first frost, sometime at the beginning of November. So if you'll continue to watch, we'll go into the potting shed and I'll show you how to plant slips and duplicate your sweet potato that you purchased into literally hundreds of sweet potatoes. So thanks for coming back and watching another video, guys. Today we are talking about these American sweet potatoes, yellow, orangish colored sweet potatoes, and how to propagate them to the point where you never have to buy sweet potatoes again. Now these are the slips I've taken off of this exact, I've broken them off earlier today so I could put them in a little bit of water so they'd be well hydrated for this process. But this is a slip and it grows directly on the side of a sweet potato. They will grow very quickly, and what you're going to do is when you put them in this jar apparatus, you're going to fill the water up just to about an inch above or close to the top of the jar where the sweet potato is in water. But we're talking about taking these slips and making them into many more plants. Each one of these slips will become its own plant. So one more thing about these slips is using the slips from an exact potato that you want to replicate or clone or propagate. You're going to take the slip, and once you do that, you're recreating the exact characteristics of this sweet potato. So that's the great thing about slips. You're cloning an exact copy of the sweet potato that you really enjoyed and that you want to reproduce over and over. Okay guys, so this is the sweet potato I was referring to, and there's new slips forming on it. And it was sitting close to a window, so I believe that's why the growth is kind of headed to one side. But the slips that came off of it look really healthy. There are some, let me see if I can get this to focus. There are some leaves starting to form. And so this was broken off earlier today. I've had it sitting in water for most of the afternoon. But this is a non-organic sweet potato, and you can see that it has a lot of slips beginning to start on this one. Now with my organic sweet potatoes, I'm going to show you the step to beginning these in a jar. I've taken these are actually skewers. They're bamboo skewers for barbecuing. You can also use toothpicks, but I just use these. They're a little bit stronger and a little bit more supportive. So what you're going to do is you're going to fill up your jar with water almost to the top. And you're going to leave about an inch at the top. I may have put too much in there. Okay, now we've got it close to the top. We've got our 3 stabilization bamboo skewers in there. We're going to put that in the water. Now it's really close to the top. So that's how you're going to do each sweet potato to get it to start putting out its slips at the top of the potato. It does need a little bit of moisture. Now, one thing you're going to remember, you don't want to leave this water for 4 or 5 days. You want to try to change it out about every 2 to 3 days so the water doesn't become stagnant and you have a problem with fungus or whatever else might be growing in your water. Another thing about this water is you need to use rainwater or highly filtered water or bottled water, because sometimes in tap water you have chlorines and other chemicals that shouldn't be there, which is really bad for us too. But anyways, that's what you want to do. You want to get the purest water you can for the potato to be very happy. Now, will it work in tap water? Yeah, it probably will, unless you have a really low quality tap water in your area. So that's one thing to remember: good quality water, and just support it and let about 1 to 2 inches into the water so it can at least have some moisture. I wouldn't say half. Some people say go all the way to half, but I just like to put the bottom maybe 20% in the water. Now, generally speaking, sweet potatoes love heat, and these sweet potatoes, you want to probably put them inside your house, and you want the temperature to be between 70 and 80, so maybe an unheated basement in the summertime, but not in the wintertime. If you're having a problem in doing this and you want to put them somewhere where it's not heated, you're going to want to use a heat mat and set your sweet potatoes directly on the heat mat. I'll put a link to this heat mat. It was part of a kit, and so it was really handy to have this, and I think it was a seedling tray and a dome. It all came as one kit there. So that's what you want to do, is you want to start them in water. 70 to 80 degrees is the preferable ideal temperature. So remember that. If it's below 70, you may not have any of the formation of the slips, and that's one thing you need to remember. You need to have that temperature because they do like heat. A note on where you want to place these inside of your home is in a window with indirect sunlight, maybe a window that has a shade tree outside, but you don't want a window, south-facing window, where sunlight comes in. It's going to heat the water up too much, and there's a good chance your sweet potato may rot. So that's one thing to remember. You don't absolutely have to have sunlight in the beginning, but at some point, as they start to form out here, if I can get this out of my head, as they start to form, you're going to want to add a little bit of indirect light, but not direct sunlight. You don't want this water to be hot. Now, another thing to remember is patience is key when it comes to waiting on your slips to form. It might take 3 to 4 weeks before you see any significant growth, so just be patient and give it time. That's one thing to remember. This one, I can't give you the exact amount of time, but we were kind of shocked as how fast these slips formed. So it was rather quick, and they did great. And we've got a lot of new plants ready to go into their potting trays. And so this one is actually making more slips. So it's really a good potato to start over and over and over. And you can do this repeatedly with one tuber, which is a sweet potato. That's another way to call it, but it's actually a tuber. Now, if you decide to put the slips directly into water and allow them, break them off and let them grow, you're going to see white roots forming on the slips. And that's part of its growth process. Some people are going to say put these directly in soil, but I kind of like watching the slips produce the roots. It's kind of exciting to know you're going to have a new sweet potato plant over and over, and I just like that, being able to see what's happening in the water. But you can do it directly in the soil, but just remember it will take some time for those white roots to grow if you decide to grow these in water, the slips, that is. Okay, so when the slips are growing on the potato, you want to wait till they're about 4 to 6 inches in length, and you just gently remove them from the potato. Now, I got a little bit excited today, and I should have did this on video, but basically you're going to gently twist them off or gently pull them off. They'll come off very easily. Don't cut them. You just want them all the way to where it meets with the tuber, and you'll just go from there. But remember, just gently take them off. You don't need to cut them because you want to get the entire slip. So once you've gotten your slips removed from your tuber, you'll want to put them directly into some water, maybe a glass this size with maybe just a little bit of water in it, maybe half an inch. You don't have to leave them in there permanently because you can go on to the next step. But if, like I said earlier, I like to watch the root development. So you'll want to support these off of the bottom of the glass, maybe just putting a piece of tape so they'll be supported up against the rim of the glass so the roots will be able to grow down below. So that is, and maybe even a bud vase, that might be even better so you can see the roots growing down. But you don't want the bud vase to be so narrow that you can't pull the roots out without damaging them. So that would be the next step, is just to make sure they stay hydrated until you're next ready to go on to where they're going to ultimately end up. Now, as your days become shorter, and this is September, and they are starting, I notice, a few minutes missing out of the day, or the light at the end of the day missing out of the end of each day, you're going to want to make sure your tubers have some artificial light because the days are getting shorter. So you can use an LED light, a fluorescent light. I've got some grow lights. I'll link at down at the bottom in the description. But you just want some light to allow these leaves to form and the tubers to continue to grow really well. Excuse me, the slips. I'm saying tuber, but yeah, the slips. Now, as far as the tubers go, they don't necessarily need a lot of light until they start forming those slips. So just remember, more light's needed, less light. Can I get this out? Less light is needed on your sweet potato tubers. Your slips will need a similar amount of light during a summer day, probably 12 to 14 hours. So if you'll put your fluorescent light, LED light, or your grow light on a timer and just plan on about 12 hours a day, that's really going to help, and that's going to speed up the process. You're just mimicking the summer light going into September when the days are getting shorter. So even if it's near a window, each day you're losing a few minutes of light. So remember, invest in a really good grow light, and it'll pay off in a lot of ways because you can not only use it here, but you can use it on so many other things. So it's good to invest in some really good pots that will last you a long time, and that's these grow bags that I use. They have little handles on the side. I believe this is a 3-gallon size. I've got some 20-gallon sizes that I really like. But the cost on these, they come in a 10-pack on Amazon, and they're really inexpensive. So you want a good grow bag. Under this bag, you're going to want to put a saucer, obviously the same thing with any kind of plastic pot. You'll want to make sure that you don't get water all over the place. But that's what you need, is a good bag to start with, or a pot, something you're going to want to grow and give it plenty of space. We're going to just do one tuber in this pot, as opposed to the way we're doing it in these 2 glass jars. So I'm doing it 2 ways. I'm going to do it directly in soil and in the water method to generate those slips. So the tuber, we're starting directly in our grow bag with our potting mix. We're going to use a potting mix that's extremely well draining, maybe even a little bit closer to the succulent or cactus type soil. We just want it to drain quite a bit so there's a lot of oxygen in the soil. And the important reason you want that soil to be well draining is you don't want the soil to be waterlogged and a chance of rot happening and you lose your sweet potato through rot or fungus or something like that. So just make sure you're using a well draining potting soil. Further on in the video, I'm going to give you my exact recipe, but I'll put a link at the top to show you how I make my general potting soil. I might add a little bit of extra perlite, but take a look at that video that explains how I make my own potting soil. But in this case, I want even more drainage to take place because I want oxygen in the soil, but I want the tuber to have its best chance to survive with no rot or no funguses. Okay, so I filled up the bag here, or our potting bag, about 90% of the way with our proprietary blend of potting mix, and I've added a little bit of extra perlite. I just want the drainage to be at its maximum, but we're not using this tuber to create more sweet potatoes. We're using it to harvest the slips that are going to be growing on it. Now, I've got another upcoming video where I talk about growing sweet potatoes in buckets, and that's a great way to do it because you can transport them inside. If you're in the fall of the year, you can overwinter them and then bring them out after your last frost. But as far as this goes, I'm not burying them under the soil. I'll show you exactly what I'm doing, but what I want to do is I want to make this the sweet potato that I use to collect the slips from. Now, if you don't want to use perlite, you can do another mixture, and that is with sand. You're going to do 1 part sand and 2 parts potting mix, and you're going to mix those together thoroughly. They actually grow, sweet potatoes actually grow in a sandy-like soil, so that's what they're going to like. So if you don't want to use perlite, use sand. It'll drain just as great. But just remember, it needs to be a well-draining potting mix. Another word on your potting mix in the pH of your soil. Sweet potatoes tend to like their potting soil a little bit more on the acidic side, from a 5.5 to a 6.5. So to do that, you might add a little bit of lime to your potting mix to bring down the pH if it's too sweet or too alkaline. The other thing you can add is peat moss. That will also bring down the pH level, but 5.5 to 6.5. Now, I've got a rapid test pH tester, and a very, very old pH tester I've had for 20 years. So, but I've ordered another one today that I want to compare, and I'm going to go with a test strip kit to try to get the most accurate pH from whichever of the three. I'm just going to compare them all to the strips that I've ordered, and I'll make a video about that too. But the pH tester, just a minute about pH testers, can be extremely expensive if you want a professional grade pH tester. We're talking about $200 to $300, maybe even more. These pH testers are a little bit more on the basic side just for the average gardener, and they still work. They won't last forever. They do have a lifespan, but I'll put a link to the one I just ordered today. I'm hoping it's going to be good. If it's a bad pH tester and I don't like it, I'm going to take the link out. So if you don't see it, you'll know what happened. But anyways, you want that pH to be 5.5 to 6.5, and that, like I said before, it affects the growth rate if you have the soil is just too alkaline and not acidic enough. Now, before I move on to potting our slips, I want to talk about potting the entire potato or the tuber. We're going to go about 50% of the width of the tuber into the soil, and I want to leave the top half exposed so that it will send out more slips more readily and it will have an easier time. If I'm wanting to do this in a 5-gallon bucket, it's a little bit of a different process. And like I said earlier, I'm going to make another video that explains that. But that's what we're doing. We're leaving the top half of the sweet potato exposed, and in a matter of time, if we water, we'll start to see new slips forming. Now we're going to take our first slip, and I want to show you what we're seeing here. I'm trying to make sure this stays in focus, but you'll see little nodules on the sides of the slip. Those are going to become future roots, and so we're going to plant this about 50%, and we're going to leave a few of the leaves that are already coming out. We're going to plant the bottom half of this in our soil. But those nodules, I just want to show you, those are going to become entirely new root systems under the soil, and eventually will become whole, entire new sweet potatoes. So just showing you about a 50% depth on this 6 to 7 inch tuber. Now, I've got quite a few of these bags. It was part of a I think it was a discount. There was a coupon involved. And so I got a lot of these bags for a very reasonable price. What I'm going to do is I'm going to plant this slip, like I said, 50% of the way down of its height, leave some of the leaves sticking out. This is going to go inside my house, and so it's going to spend quite a bit of time there. Remember, don't forget your uh, drip tray. You don't want to water your carpet or wherever you have it inside your house. Keep it moist and make sure that it doesn't dry out. You're going to want to have a soil tester to make sure, and this is a simple one. It's got a probe on it, and like I said, I just ordered one. It's a multi-probe. It has a lot of different functions, but make sure you have a moisture meter so you can make sure that the slip is not drying out and it's maintaining its consistent moisture inside. You don't want it waterlogged. You want it to drain well, but at the same time, you don't want it to dry out and your slip to die after you've put all this effort into starting a new slip. Now, if you're using an extra large container, you'll want to make sure that you separate these for about 10 to 12 inches so that each tuber is not competing for nutrients and has plenty of room to grow. So if it's some kind of really large container or a square container that's really deep, like a tub, make sure that it is separated by about 10 to 12 inches for each slip. Now, most variety of sweet potatoes are not heavy feeders, and you don't have to fertilize them a whole bunch. And what you don't want a high nitrogen, because that's going to encourage a lot of leaf growth and not so much tuber growth. So what you want to do is you want something like this that has a high phosphorus content. That encourages root growth. You want to get low nitrogen, high phosphorus, the NPK. The P in NPK is phosphorus, and that's what's going to make them grow so much better. They prefer, or you'll prefer, a lot more growth underneath the soil rather than on top of the soil. Just remember that. Something as a high NPK middle number. I'll link this, or I'll put a link down below to this product because I use this all the time and I often talk about it in my videos. Now, it may not be a bad idea to do a pest treatment on this before you bring it inside around the soil and on the plant itself. I wouldn't use a chemical fertilizer, a chemical pesticide. And what I usually like to use is neem oil. I have a video where I talk about a natural pesticide I use, an organic pesticide I use. But this neem oil is very special, and I'll put the link to it as to why not all neem oils are the same. Neem oil is actually made from the seeds of the neem oil tree. So this is an organic, all organic pesticide. It has a little bit of a strong odor, so some people may not like that, but it's very safe, and a lot of gardeners talk about it. So I would do that. Inspect your plant as it grows for any pest or anything like that. If you didn't fertilize it before you brought it in, just make sure that you don't see anything eating leaves. But I do encourage you to buy some neem oil and use that as a natural insecticide, completely organic. So if your plant starts to become too leggy and too tall, you can pinch back the top growth and it'll give it more of a shrub-like growth, and that's what's going to make it a healthier plant. So you don't want it to become too leggy. It may be growing towards light in the window, so just keep it kind of compact while it's inside before it goes back out into the garden. So that's a very important thing to do. Just don't let it go crazy inside your house reaching for that sunlight. Now, speaking of pruning the plant, sometimes you might have roots grow out of the pot, whatever you might have it in at the bottom. It's perfectly okay to prune those roots. If you know anything about bonsai, root pruning is a very normal process in that world. And so also with sweet potatoes, you can prune any roots you see coming out the bottom or the top of the plant, and that actually will lead to a healthier plant. So it's nothing to worry about, and it will definitely help the plant survive longer. It'll give it more robustness, and I think it'll help overall. Now, as with all plants, I've seen this on huge oak trees. I've seen it on bonsai. I've seen it on everything. Plants will grow towards light, and so if you have this sitting near a window or a grow light, you'll want to rotate your pot maybe every 3 to 4 days, so get the growth even, so it's not growing out in one direction. So that's an important thing to do, is remember pot rotation will help your slip grow more evenly. Now, while slips themselves need a lot of warmth to get started, you don't want wild temperature fluctuations with the mature plant. Between 65 and 85 is where you want to keep it. So you don't want to take it outside on a day that's going to get down into the 50s. The plant will not like it. So just try to keep it in that range of 65 to 85. If you know that an extreme heat day is coming up or extreme cold day is coming up and you just want to take it outside and give it some light, I would just recommend keeping it inside rather than taking a chance on it being shocked by that temperature swing. Now, if you're growing your plant inside where it might be close to an air conditioning vent or a fan, That's something you want to avoid. You want to avoid overly drafty areas. Air circulation is great for the plant, but excessive airflow can be detrimental to the plant. So just remember, airflow is good, but near a vent, a fan, a ceiling fan, you'd want to keep it out of that area and just have it where there's just a very minimal airflow. You don't want completely stagnant air. In a basement, you might want to put a fan on the other side of the room and just have air circulating within that area, or maybe on a timer might be the best thing to do. Now, the next thing I want to talk about is container choice. I've already mentioned the grow bags that I use here, and I really like them. I'm probably going to use them for many years to come, but I have a lot of plastic pots. I have a lot of terracotta pots. The second best choice over a grow bag would be a terracotta pot, because it allows the excess moisture to breathe. Terracotta has kind of a breathing, unless you put some kind of coating or paint on the outside of the terracotta pot, that pot will actually breathe. So that's one thing to consider. The plastic pot is going to be the pot that holds the most moisture, and too much water in the soil is the enemy of our slip. So just remember, one would be grow bag, two terracotta, and finally, if you have no other choice, use a plastic pot. But I think this is your best bet, allowing the plant to shed that extra moisture in the soil. Now, as your slip grows in your house over the winter, there's one really important thing to consider, and that's humidity. Um, these plants, the sweet potato prefers a lot of humidity. In the south where I'm at, the humidity is incredible in the summertime. It's like being in a sauna. But that's what you want, is you want humidity for these to grow. They like heat and they like humidity. So if it's growing inside and you feel like maybe it's too dry, if you have an AC unit that dries out the air, or use natural gas, which can make the air in the wintertime extremely dry, put a humidity tray under it, and you might put pebbles in the tray, which will allow more evaporation and increase the humidity. Another way is to just lightly mist it with bottled water or very filtered tap water. Use a filter, or to collect rainwater. That's probably the best thing, because rainwater tends to be a little bit more acidic. So you can mist it, and that will definitely help the plant. You don't want it to be in an extremely dry air environment. So that's really important. Misting, humidity tray, and just making sure you keep a check on those two things. I mentioned fertilization before, and one thing you'll want to do is, as the plant grows, if you notice you're getting a lot of yellow leaves or discoloration in the leaves and they're not a healthy green color, it could be a fertilizer imbalance. So you might want to try slow release fertilizer, or hitting it again with something like the bloom booster that will help the root system. And those leaves, you just remove them and just make sure this doesn't keep happening over and over. It could indicate an even bigger problem, but I think it may be just a fertilizer imbalance. And so you want to make sure you have that in check throughout the months that you have it inside. As your slip grows and gets bigger and bigger, you're going to have to consider, if you're not close to taking it outdoors, you may have to consider going up to a larger pot size. So that may be something you have to do before you're able to get past that last frost date. So when you take it out of the pot, make sure you're very gentle with the root system and carefully put it into a larger size pot, and just inspect the roots and make sure there's no obvious problems with them. But that's one thing to remember, is that if it starts outgrowing its pot, and this is not a small pot, it's like 3 gallons, but if you have to go to a 5-gallon, you'll have to do that. I will make a video on growing in 5-gallon pots, so that's something to take into consideration. Once you get your slip outside and the tubers are growing great, and maybe you've upsized to a larger pot, or maybe you even put it directly into a raised bed or into the garden, it's going to take about 4 to 6 months from the start before you're able to harvest your sweet potatoes. So give it that 4 to 6 months. One way to tell is if you start seeing a lot of yellowing leaves after that 4 to 6 month period, it might mean that it's ready to harvest. Also, you can just do a direct inspection by carefully digging around in the soil and making sure that you have some large sweet potatoes. So if it's yellowing and they're not mature, it may be another problem, underwatering, disease, something like that, insect problem. So just make sure that you wait that 4 to 6 months before you try to harvest. Now, whether inside or outside, depending on what time of year you're doing this, I always recommend putting a very thin layer, maybe half an inch to an inch layer of mulch on top. Now, this is a very finely shredded pine bark, and it's really great. I use it in so many different areas of the garden, and I might actually start using it on all my vegetables just to do weed prevention. But in this case, because we have this pot and we don't want a lot of evaporation happening if we forget to water or we take it outside, we want there to be plenty of moisture in the soil. So we're using this to prevent evaporation. So that's a great problem. If you go to Lowe's, it'll be in a very large bag. it'll be called soil conditioner. I believe it's Lowe's. But where else it's sold, I don't know. I've always got it at Lowe's hardware, so you might try that. If you can't find it there, just ask the garden center, do they have any finely ground pine bark or any kind of finely ground bark? That's the ideal substance as a mulch to go in your grow bag. One thing that might happen when your slip is growing indoors or outdoors, you might see it flower. That is not an indication that your sweet potatoes are ready to harvest. That's just a bonus that happens when you're growing sweet potatoes. So just disregard it if you see flowers. There's no meaning behind it. It's that period of time and the yellowing of the leaves is what you're looking for, or a direct inspection of the tubers themselves. So let's say you made it past your last frost and you're ready to take your slips, tubers out to the garden and plant them in your raised beds or directly somewhere into your garden. You might consider doing a companion plant like herbs, something like basil, strong smelling plants, and putting them close to them, and it might deter pests, and they just make good companions. So that's something to consider. A lot of people overlook. They'll just put their sweet potatoes in a bed by itself, but those companion plants can help. Strong smelling things like basil and some of the other lemon thyme, those can sometimes deter pests because they don't like it, especially the slugs. They do not like strong smelling things like that. So let's say it's the end of summer and you've harvested your sweet potatoes, and that's a really nice thing when you've succeeded in that effort, because it is a long wait. It's a lot of effort. So let's say you've harvested them, you have a lot of sweet potatoes, and you need to store them. For the first 10 days, you want to store them in a warm, humid area. After that, you're going to put them in a cool, dry area. That first 10 days is curing the sweet potato, and after that is just strictly storage. So that is what you want to do. You want to store the first 10 days warm and humid. After that, cool and dry. Okay, one more thing about growing in water. Once you've removed all of the slips from your sweet potato, put it back in the water and start the process over, because it will continue to generate those new slips. So that's one of those things. Just keep doing it over and over, especially if the sweet potato was a very high quality and you really liked it. You're going to be cloning that plant over and over and getting the same results as long as you follow all the guides, tips, and rules in this video. So one thing I forgot to mention, or maybe I mentioned it earlier and I told you I was going to give you the simple recipe. So you're going to use 1/3 of your potting mix, 1/3 of your compost. I use black cow bran, and 1/3 perlite. That's the drainage, that helps with drainage and aeration and oxygen. So those three things is very important. You want 3 equal parts, and on the top you can dust it with maybe just a light dusting of peat moss to lower the acidity just a little bit. If you have a soil tester and you want to make sure your pH is a little bit on the acidic side, use one of those. So anyways, that is the simple recipe that I mentioned earlier for your slips and to put the tuber directly into. Hey guys, so I want to say thanks for watching, and I really appreciate it. I hope this helps you learn something about growing sweet potatoes, and I am going to do another video where I talk about growing sweet potatoes in 5-gallon buckets. That's a little bit of a different process, and I actually have a third method about growing sweet potatoes in towers, so keep an eye out for those videos. Also, I'll upload some shorts giving you an update on how these are growing throughout the winter. It's mid-September here, so I'll let you know how that works. Anyways, I hope you guys have a great day, and I really appreciate you watching. Sweet potato pie.